My mother-in-law, Claudette Foster, declared I wasn't refined enough to attend the prestigious Carrington family dinner, claiming my presence would embarrass them at the exclusive venue. She had no idea that the entire Bellissimo restaurant chain they'd chosen belonged to me. The moment she saw me walk in as the owner, greeting the staff who bowed respectfully, was when her perfect world came crashing down. The crystal chandeliers of Bellissimo's flagship location cast dancing shadows across the marble floors as I stood in my office, watching the security feed of the main dining room. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. There they were, the Foster family, seated at their coveted table by the window, Claudette holding court like a queen among her subjects. My husband Carson sat beside her, checking his phone repeatedly, probably wondering why I hadn't responded to his apologetic texts. It had been 3 days since Claudette's proclamation. "Jennifer," she'd said, her voice dripping with false concern during our last phone call, "I think it's best if you skip this year's dinner. The Carringtons are joining us, and well, you understand. We need to maintain certain standards." Standards. The word echoed in my mind as I smoothed down my designer suit, the same suit I'd worn to close the deal on my 5th restaurant location last month. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 5 years, I'd endured Claudette's constant belittlement, her snide remarks about my little hobby of working in hospitality, her persistent suggestions that I should focus on being a proper foster wife instead of playing businesswoman. I watched as my mother-in-law gestured grandly to the Carringtons, no doubt regaling them with stories of Carson's latest achievements at his law firm. Genevieve Carrington, dressed in pearls and judgment, nodded approvingly while her husband Adam leafed through the wine list, my carefully curated selection of vintages I'd personally sourced from small family vineyards across Italy. The maître, D'Angelo, approached their table with the reverence Claudette expected. What she didn't know was that Angelo had started as a server when I opened my first location 7 years ago, back when everyone thought I was just a naive dreamer with more ambition than sense. He'd been with me through every expansion, every challenge, every victory. "Mrs. Foster," Angelo's voice came through the security feed, "we have a special announcement this evening. The owner of Bellissimo will be joining us shortly to welcome our distinguished guests personally." Claudette's face lit up. "Oh, how wonderful. I've always wanted to meet him. Such an accomplished businessman to build this empire." Him, Claudette, had dined at my restaurants at least a dozen times, always assuming the mysterious Jay Hathaway on the corporate documents was a man. It never occurred to her that her dismissed daughter-in-law could be behind the city's most successful restaurant chain. I pressed the intercom. "Angelo, I'm ready." Taking one last look in the mirror, I saw myself as they never had. Jennifer Hathaway, not just Mrs. Carson Foster. The woman who'd started with a small cafe and a dream, who'd worked 18-hour days while her in-laws whispered about her failure to prioritize family. The woman who'd quietly built an empire while they dismissed her as unworthy of their social circle. The walk from my office to the main dining room felt like a victory march. Each step echoed with memories. Claudette's voice telling me I lacked sophistication, her sisters whispering about my common background at family gatherings, Carson's uncomfortable silence whenever his mother criticized my career choices. As I approached their table, I saw Carson first. His eyes widened, his fork stopping midway to his mouth. He started to rise, but I gave him a slight shake of my head. This wasn't his moment to intervene. "Ladies and gentlemen," Angelo announced, his voice carrying across the dining room, "please welcome the founder and CEO of Bellissimo Restaurant Group, Ms. Jennifer Hathaway." The silence that followed was absolute. Claudette's perfectly painted smile froze, then crumbled. Genevieve Carrington's wine glass tilted dangerously in her suddenly slack grip. Adam Carrington straightened in his chair, reassessing everything. He thought he knew about the Foster family dynamics. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady and clear. I understand we have some very special guests tonight. The Foster and Carrington families. What an honor. Claudette's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Jennifer? But how? This isn't possible. Oh, but it is, Claudette, I replied, allowing myself a small smile. Bellissimo has been my little hobby for 7 years. Now, 5 locations, 3 Michelin stars, and a waiting list that extends 6 months. All built while I was apparently not refined enough for family dinners. The Carringtons exchanged glances, clearly recalibrating their assessment of the Foster family. Carson had the grace to look ashamed, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of pride and regret. He'd known about my success. We lived in the same house, after all, but he'd never confronted his mother's treatment of me, always choosing the path of least resistance. I don't understand, Claudette stammered, her carefully constructed superiority crumbling. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us believe? Let you believe what, exactly? I interrupted gently. That I was just a middle-class girl who married above her station? That I spent my days shopping and lunching while Carson provided for us? You never asked, Claudette. You assumed. And when I tried to share my achievements, you dismissed them, as beneath notice. Angelo appeared at my side with a bottle of our exclusive vintage, the one we only serve to VIP guests. Your usual, Ms. Hathaway? Thank you, Angelo. And please bring a glass for everyone at the table. This is, after all, a family dinner. As Angelo poured the wine, I took the empty seat that had been conspicuously absent a place card. My seat, the one Claudette had decided I didn't deserve. The weight of 5 years of dismissal, of being made to feel small, of having my dreams mocked and my successes ignored, all culminated in this single moment. Now then, I said, raising my glass, shall we toast to family gatherings and maintaining certain standards? The crystal stem felt cool against my fingers as I waited, watching the realization dawn on each face around the table. This wasn't just about owning restaurants. This was about a fundamental shift in power, a complete upending of everything they thought they knew about their family hierarchy. Claudette's hand trembled as she reached for her glass, her perfect manicure catching the light. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain, vulnerable even. The woman who'd built her identity on being the gatekeeper of social status had just discovered she'd been excluding the very person who could have elevated her standing all along. To family, I continued, my voice warm but firm, and to the truth finally coming to light. As we clinked glasses, I knew this was just the beginning. The real story, how a dismissed daughter-in-law built an empire while her critics weren't looking, was about to unfold. And this time I wouldn't be silent. The stage was set. The players were in position. And I was finally ready to tell my story. The dinner continued in a surreal atmosphere of forced politeness and barely concealed shock. I settled into my seat, observing the family dynamics I'd studied from the periphery for years, now viewing them from a completely different vantage point. The shift in energy was palpable. Where before there had been casual dismissal, now there was wary respect tinged with confusion. Carson cleared his throat, his lawyer's training kicking in as he attempted to navigate this unexpected situation. Jennifer has been quite modest about her business ventures, he offered weakly, shooting me an apologetic glance. The truth was, he'd been content to keep our lives compartmentalized, his family's social world and my business world existing in separate spheres. Modest? Genevieve Carrington interjected, her calculating eyes reassessing me. Building a restaurant empire is hardly something one keeps modest about, unless, of course, there were reasons for such discretion. I smiled, recognizing the probe for what it was. Sometimes the best strategy is to build quietly, without fanfare. It allows for authentic growth without the pressure of public scrutiny or family expectations. Claudette flinched at that last part. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She was struggling to maintain her composure, her hands fidgeting with her napkin in a way I'd never seen before. The woman who prided herself on perfect control was visibly shaken. "I simply don't understand," she finally managed, her voice lacking its usual authority. "All these years you let us believe." "I let you believe what you wanted to believe," I corrected gently. "Every time I mentioned my work, you changed the subject. When I invited you to my first restaurant opening, you declined, saying it conflicted with your bridge club. When I tried to share my business plans, you suggested I take up tennis instead." Adam Carrington leaned forward, his business acumen clearly piqued. "The Bellissimo chain has been the talk of the industry. We've been trying to secure a meeting with the owner for months to discuss potential partnerships. To think, the connection was right here all along." The irony was delicious. The Carringtons owned a successful import business, specializing in luxury goods. They'd been courting my restaurants to feature their exclusive wine collections, unaware that the owner they'd been pursuing was the same woman Claudette had deemed unworthy of their social circle. "Perhaps we could discuss that partnership over dessert," I suggested, watching Claudette's face cycle through various shades of discomfort. After all, family should support family, shouldn't they? The arrival of our appetizers provided a momentary reprieve from the tension. I noticed how the staff moved with extra precision, aware that their employer was at the table. Marco, my head chef, had personally come out to ensure everything was perfect. His loyalty, like Angelo's, had been earned through years of mutual respect and shared vision. "The salmon carpaccio is Marco's specialty," I mentioned as the plates were arranged. "He trained under Chef Dubois in Paris before joining our team." "You know the staff personally?" Genevieve asked, surprise evident in her tone. "Every single one," I confirmed. "From the dishwashers to the sommelier. A restaurant is only as good as its team, and I believe in knowing the people who help build your dreams." Carson shifted uncomfortably. He'd often heard his mother criticize my overly familiar approach with service staff, insisting that proper society maintained professional distance. Now, faced with the reality that I employed hundreds of people across the city, her classist attitudes seemed particularly short-sighted. "Tell me, Jennifer," Adam Carrington ventured, "how did you manage to keep this so quiet? The business community is usually quite interconnected." I took a sip of wine before responding. "I operated under my maiden name professionally. J. Hathaway Hospitality Group doesn't immediately connect to Jennifer Foster in social circles. Plus, I found that being underestimated had its advantages. Competitors didn't see me coming, and opportunities arose from unexpected places. The subtext wasn't lost on anyone. Claudette had spent years trying to mold me into her vision of a proper foster wife, never realizing that her daughter-in-law was building something far beyond her limited imagination. But surely Carson knew, Genevieve pressed, glancing between my husband and me. Carson knew I was successful, I acknowledged, but he respected my wish to keep my professional life separate from family gatherings. I didn't want my achievements to become fodder for dinner party conversation or social climbing opportunities. The accusation hung in the air, delicate but unmistakable. Claudette's obsession with status had been a constant in our relationship. Every achievement was measured by its social capital, every connection evaluated for its networking potential. "I think what Mother means," Carson finally spoke up, finding his voice, "is that she wishes she had known so she could have been proud of you." I met his eyes steadily. "Pride shouldn't be conditional on achievement, Carson. I was the same person when I was starting out, working double shifts and coming home exhausted. The only difference now is a bank balance and some real estate holdings." Claudette's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. "You must think terribly of us," she said quietly, the admission costing her visible effort. "I think you're human," I replied, surprising myself with the honesty. We all have our biases and blind spots. The question is what we do once we see them clearly. The main course arrived then, my signature dish, a twist on traditional aso. Buko that had earned rave reviews from critics nationwide. As plates were set before us, I caught glimpses of the other diners stealing glances our way. Word had spread through the restaurant that the owner was dining with family, and the atmosphere had shifted subtly. Staff moved with extra purpose, regular patrons whispered behind raised menus, and the entire establishment seemed to hum with barely contained excitement. "This is extraordinary," Adam Carrington declared after his first bite. "No wonder there's a 6-month waiting list." 8 months, actually, I corrected with a small smile. Though family, of course, never needs a reservation. The pointed reminder of Claudette's earlier exclusion landed precisely as intended. She set down her fork, her appetite clearly affected by more than just the rich food. "Jennifer," she began, her voice uncharacteristically humble, "I believe I owe you an apology." I raised my hand slightly. "Perhaps we should save that conversation for after dinner. Right now, I'd like to enjoy this meal with my family. All of my family." The inclusion was deliberate, the olive branch extended, but on my terms. As conversation gradually resumed around the table, I reflected on how different this evening was from what I'd imagined. For years, I'd pictured this moment of revelation, but reality was proving far more complex than fantasy. This wasn't just about vindication or revenge. It was about redefining relationships and establishing new boundaries. As the dinner progressed, I found myself thinking about the path that had led to this moment. The sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the countless times I'd bitten my tongue at family gatherings while Claudette extolled Carson's achievements and dismissed my little restaurant project. Tonight, the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. But with that shift came responsibility. The responsibility to handle this revelation with grace, even as part of me wanted to savor every moment of their discomfort. The real test wasn't in the revelation itself, but in what would come after. As dessert arrived, my signature chocolate soufflé with espresso cream, I observed the careful dance of power playing out before me. Claudette Foster had always been the undisputed matriarch of the family, her word as good as law when it came to social engagements and family decisions. Now, she sat at my table in my restaurant, struggling to reconcile the daughter-in-law she'd dismissed with the successful businesswoman before her. "You know," Genevieve Carrington mused, breaking the awkward silence. "I remember when Claudette told us about Carson's engagement. She said he'd found someone. How did you put it, dear? Refreshingly uncomplicated." The barb was elegantly delivered, but its impact was clear. Claudette's cheeks flushed slightly as she reached for her wine glass. "I may have used those words," Claudette admitted stiffly. "Jennifer came from such a different background than ours. No family connections in business, no established social presence. Just a middle-class girl from Minnesota," I added helpfully, watching her squirm. "Raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs. Hardly the pedigree expected for a foster bride." Carson shifted uncomfortably beside me. He'd fallen in love with that middle-class girl, but he'd never defended her when his mother made cutting remarks about everything from my table manners to my quaint relatives. And yet, Adam Carrington interjected, his businessman's mind clearly calculating, "Here we sit in one of the city's most successful restaurant ventures. It seems pedigree isn't everything, Claudette." The slight rebuke from someone Claudette considered a social equal landed hard. For years, she'd carefully cultivated her relationship with the Carringtons, viewing them as the kind of family she wished her son had married into. Now that very family was questioning her judgment. "Tell us, Jennifer." Genevieve leaned forward, genuinely interested. "When did you start planning all this? Surely it wasn't just coincidence that we're having this revelation at your restaurant tonight." I smiled, appreciating her astuteness. I've owned this particular location for 3 years. In fact, Claudette, you've celebrated your last 2 birthdays here. You specifically requested this restaurant both times, praising its sophisticated atmosphere and impeccable service. Claudette's face paled as the implications sank in. She'd been inadvertently complimenting her rejected daughter-in-law to her society friends for years. But why tonight? Carson asked, finally engaging with the situation. Why reveal this now? Because, I said evenly, when your mother called to inform me I wasn't welcome at the family dinner, she chose to have this exclusive gathering at my restaurant. She made a point of telling me that the Carringtons were people of our caliber, and that my presence might confuse the social dynamics. I turned to address Claudette directly. You banned me from my own establishment, Claudette. The irony was too perfect to ignore. But I didn't know, she started. Exactly, I interrupted gently. You didn't know. You've never bothered to know. For 5 years you've seen what you wanted to see, a girl who married above her station, who should be grateful for the Foster name. You never saw the woman who was working 16-hour days, negotiating with suppliers, managing hundreds of employees, and building something meaningful. Angelo appeared with coffee, the silver service gleaming under the chandeliers. As he poured, I noticed how Claudette watched him. The same man she'd barely acknowledged in previous visits was now receiving her full attention. Mrs. Foster? Angelo said with professional courtesy. I hope everything has been to your satisfaction this evening. Oh, yes, Angelo, she replied, attempting warmth. Everything has been illuminating. After he left, Adam Carrington cleared his throat. Jennifer, I have to ask, the Bellissimo expansion into Chicago next year, is that still moving forward? We've heard rumors about a possible hotel component. Yes, we're finalizing the details. The restaurant will be on the ground floor of a boutique hotel. We're actually looking for the right partners for the wine program. Claudette straightened, her social antenna twitching. Even in her current state of shock, she couldn't resist an opportunity. The Carringtons' import business would be perfect. Actually, I interrupted smoothly, I've been in discussions with several suppliers. We're particularly interested in family-owned vineyards that share our values of authenticity and quality over prestigious labels. The subtle rebuke wasn't lost on anyone. Claudette had always prioritized appearances over substance, and now her daughter-in-law was pointedly choosing a different path. Carson found his voice again. Jennifer, I should have stood up for you. All those times Mom made those comments, I should have said something. Yes, I agreed simply. You should have. The baldness of my response made him flinch. Genevieve and Adam exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the Foster family dynamics they thought they understood. I suppose, Claudette said, trying to regain some control. This explains why you were always so busy, always rushing off to meetings, unavailable for charity luncheons. I was building a business, Claudette. Every charity luncheon I missed was a meeting with investors or suppliers. Every family gathering I left early was because I had a restaurant to run, employees depending on me. But you could have told us, she persisted. We could have helped. Could you? I challenged. When I mentioned I was thinking of opening a pho restaurant 6 years ago, what did you say? I believe your exact words were, why don't you take up flower arranging instead? It's more appropriate for a foster wife. Genevieve unsuccessfully tried to hide her smirk behind her coffee cup. Adam looked decidedly uncomfortable, probably recognizing his own similar attitudes toward his wife's abandoned career aspirations. That was different, Claudette weakly protested. I thought you meant a little cafe or something. Ah, yes, because a little cafe would have been acceptable as a hobby, but a successful business empire might overshadow your son? Carson winced. Jennifer, please. No, Carson. We're finally having the conversation we should have had years ago. Your mother has systematically dismissed and belittled me because I didn't come from the right background, didn't have the right connections. And you let her. The Carringtons were riveted, watching this family drama unfold with barely concealed fascination. These were the kinds of revelations that would fuel gossip for months in their social circle. "I think," Claudette said, drawing herself up with what dignity she could muster, "that there may have been some misunderstandings on both sides." "Were there?" I asked. "Was I misunderstanding when you introduced me at the club as Carson's wife who's trying her hand at the restaurant business? Or when you told your friends that at least I keep myself occupied, while Carson handles the real work?" Each example landed like a precision strike. Claudette's carefully maintained facade was crumbling, revealing the insecurity and snobbery that had driven her behavior for years. "The funny thing is," I continued, "if you had just taken the time to know me, to understand my ambitions and support them, we could have avoided all of this. I didn't want to embarrass you tonight, Claudette. I wanted you to see me, really see me for the first time." The weight of those words settled over the table. Around us, the restaurant hummed with its usual elegant efficiency, my staff moving with the practiced grace I'd worked so hard to cultivate. This was my domain, built through determination and sacrifice, and no amount of old money snobbery could diminish that achievement. Claudette dabbed at her lips with her napkin, a gesture I recognized as her way of buying time to compose herself. When she looked up, there was something different in her eyes, perhaps the beginning of genuine respect, or at least the recognition that she had gravely miscalculated. "I seem to have been quite short-sighted," she said finally. "Yes," I agreed, not offering false comfort. "You have." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths and shattered assumptions. The power dynamics of the Foster family had just undergone a seismic shift, and everyone at the table knew it. What remained to be seen was how we would all navigate this new landscape I'd so carefully orchestrated. As the dinner plates were cleared and coffee cups refilled, I found myself studying my own reflection in the polished silver coffee pot. The woman looking back at me was someone I'd fought hard to become, confident, successful, uncompromising. But beneath that polished exterior, I could feel the familiar ache of years of dismissed dreams and patronizing smiles. "If you'll excuse me for a moment," I said, rising from the table. "I need to check on something in the kitchen." Carson half rose, uncertain whether to follow, but I gave him a slight shake of my head. In my office, I closed the door and leaned against it, finally, allowing myself to feel the full weight of the evening's emotions. 5 years. 5 years of biting my tongue, of smiling politely while Claudette made barbed comments about my background. 5 years of watching Carson choose comfortable silence over defending his wife. 5 years of building an empire while pretending to be content with flower arranging and charity luncheons. I walked to the window overlooking the dining room, watching my carefully trained staff move with ballet-like precision. Each one of them knew my story. How I'd started with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. They'd witnessed my 18-hour days, my obsessive attention to detail, my refusal to accept anything less than excellence. My phone buzzed with a message from Elena, my operations manager. "Everything okay, boss? Saw the family drama from the bar. Need backup?" I smiled, touched by her loyalty. Elena had been with me since the second location, a single mother who'd needed flexible hours. Now she ran operations for all 5 restaurants, her own success. Story intertwined with mine. "I'm fine," I typed back. Just needed a moment. But was I fine? The triumph I'd imagined for so long felt hollow now that it was here. Yes, I'd proven my worth, shattered their assumptions, claimed my power. But at what cost? The anger that had fueled me for years was giving way to something more complex, a mixture of sadness and bitter satisfaction. I thought about my mother, back in Minnesota, who'd worked double shifts as a nurse to give me opportunities. She'd never understand this world of social hierarchies and calculated snubs. To her, success meant being able to pay your bills and help others. Maybe she'd been right all along. Through the window, I could see Claudette dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. Was she crying from embarrassment or genuine remorse? Did it matter? The damage of 5 years couldn't be undone with tears. I remembered the exact moment I'd decided to keep my success hidden from the Fosters. It was after our first anniversary dinner, when Claudette had spent the entire evening praising Carson's promotion while dismissing my excitement about securing my first restaurant location. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she'd said, patting my hand. "Every wife should have a little project." A little project. Those words had burned in my chest for weeks. That's when I'd decided I would build something so big, so undeniable, that when the truth finally came out, she would have to confront her own prejudice. But now, standing here in my moment of vindication, I wondered if I'd let her dismissiveness poison me. Had I become so focused on proving her wrong that I'd lost sight of why I'd started this journey in the first place? A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in." It was Angelo. "Ms. Hathaway, I apologize for disturbing you, but your husband is asking if you're all right." "How does the table seem, Angelo?" "The real temperature, not the polite version." He considered for a moment. "Your mother-in-law appears genuinely shaken. Your husband seems awakened, perhaps. The Carringtons are fascinated. I believe they're already planning business proposals in their heads." I laughed softly. "And the other diners?" Buzzing with curiosity. "The whole restaurant knows something significant is happening. Your staff is proud of you, if I may say. Thank you, Angelo, for everything, for staying with me all these years." He smiled. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. That creates loyalty that can't be bought." After he left, I straightened my jacket and checked my reflection one more time. The woman in the mirror had earned her moment. Whether it felt exactly as I'd imagined or not didn't matter. What mattered was what came next. I thought about Claudette's worldview, a rigid hierarchy where breeding and connections determined worth. She'd grown up in that world, married into it, raised her children in it. My very existence as Carson's wife had threatened that order from the start. My success without her approval, without the proper pedigree, must seem like a betrayal of everything she believed. But understanding didn't mean forgiving. Not yet. Maybe not ever. My phone buzzed again, this time from my head chef, Marco. "Need a rescue?" I could create a kitchen emergency. My staff, my chosen family. They understood, me in ways the Fosters never had. "I'm good," I replied, "just composing myself for the final act." And there would be a final act. This revelation was just the beginning. The real test would be how we all moved forward from here. Would Claudette retreat into wounded pride? Would Carson finally find his backbone? Would our marriage survive the earthquake I'd just triggered? I walked to my desk and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a folder I'd kept for years. Inside were every dismissive note, every declined invitation, every family event I'd been excluded from. I'd saved them all, fuel for my determination. Now they seemed like relics from another life. At the very bottom was a photo from our wedding day. Claudette standing stiffly next to my mother, the contrast between them stark, one in designer clothes and perfect makeup, the other in a department store dress, proud and genuine. I'd spent years trying to bridge that gap, to prove I deserved to stand on Claudette's side of that photo. But maybe the real victory wasn't in proving anything to them. Maybe it was in finally accepting that I didn't need their approval to validate my worth. I closed the folder and put it back in the drawer. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't need these reminders anymore. The anger, the hurt, the desperate need to prove myself. I could let it all go. Taking a deep breath, I prepared to return to the dining room. But this time, I wasn't going back as the overlooked daughter-in-law or the secretly successful entrepreneur. I was going back as myself, Jennifer Hathaway, complicated and whole, no longer willing to fragment herself for anyone else's comfort. The door handle felt cool under my palm. One more deep breath. It was time to discover what came after revelation, whether this family could rebuild itself around truth instead of assumptions, respect instead of hierarchy. The stage was still mine, but the script was about to change. No more hiding, no more games, no more swallowing my worth to keep the peace. Tonight hadn't just revealed my success to them, it had revealed to me that I was finally ready to stop seeking validation from people who should have offered it freely. With that realization settling into my bones, I opened the door and stepped back into my restaurant, ready to face whatever came next. I returned to the dining room just as the atmosphere reached its breaking point. The Carringtons were engaged in hushed conversation with Carson, while Claudette sat rigidly in her chair, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around her wine glass like a lifeline. The tension was palpable, like the air before a thunderstorms. I approached the table. A commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. My maitre d', Angelo, was speaking with someone in urgent, hushed tones. The conversation grew more animated, and I recognized the distinctive voice carrying across the dining room. "I don't care what your list says. Do you know who I am? I'm Claudette Foster. My family has been dining at the finest establishments in this city for generations." I turned to see Claudette's sister, my Aunt Eloise, standing at the host station, in her typical dramatic fashion. She was accompanied by two other society women I recognized from Claudette's circle, Margaret Heathers and Diana Carrington Smythe, Adam's cousin. "What's this?" Genevieve murmured, watching the scene unfold. "I thought Eloise was in Paris this week." "She was supposed to be," Claudette said tightly, her face draining of color. "I may have mentioned our dinner plans to her yesterday." Angelo approached our table with apologetic eyes. "Ms. Hathaway, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there seems to be some confusion. Mrs. Eloise Foster insists she has a standing invitation to join your table this evening. She's quite insistent." The irony wasn't lost on me. Eloise had been even more dismissive of me than Claudette, if that was possible. At every family gathering, she'd made pointed comments about my little restaurant venture, and questioned why Carson had married someone with no family connections. "By all means," I said smoothly. "Please show my aunt-in-law to our table, and her friends as well. I'm sure we can accommodate them." Angelo's eyes widened slightly, but he maintained his professional composure. "Of course, Miss Hathaway." "Right. Away." As Angelo returned to collect Eloise and her entourage, Claudette leaned toward me urgently. "Jennifer, please. Eloise doesn't know about... She still thinks that I'm nobody," I finished for her. "Don't worry, Claudette. I think it's time your sister learned the truth as well." Eloise swept toward our table with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything in her life. She was dressed impeccably in Chanel, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. "Claudette, darling," she exclaimed, air-kissing her sister's cheeks. "I simply had to stop by when I heard you were entertaining the Carringtons. Although," she paused, finally noticing me, "I see you've included Carson's wife after all. How charitable of you." "Eloise," Claudette said weakly, "perhaps you should sit down." "In a moment, dear. First, let me introduce my friends to the owner of this marvelous establishment. We've been trying to get a table here for weeks. The waiting list is absolutely impossible. But I told them, once I mention the Foster name, doors always open." She laughed, the sound tinkling like breaking glass. "Now, where is this mysterious owner? I've heard he's quite reclusive." The table fell silent. Carson cleared his throat. Adam Carrington suddenly became very interested in his wine glass. Genevieve's lips twitched with barely suppressed amusement. "Actually, Aunt Eloise," I said, standing and extending my hand, "you already know the owner quite well." Eloise's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in confusion. "I'm sorry, dear. What did you say? The owner of Bellissimo. You're looking at her. The words hung in the air like a perfectly timed punchline. Eloise's hand froze halfway to her. Pearls, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Her friends exchanged bewildered glances. Don't be ridiculous, Eloise finally managed. This is one of the most successful restaurant groups in the city. The owner is some business mogul. Not. She waved dismissively in my direction. Not Carson's little wife. Jay Hathaway, I said calmly. Jennifer Hathaway. I've owned this restaurant for 3 years, and the entire Bellissimo group for 7. In fact, you recently wrote a letter to the editor of City Magazine praising our exquisite attention to detail and unparalleled dining experience. Diana Carrington Smythe gasped audibly. Margaret Heathers took a swift step backward as if I'd suddenly revealed myself to be dangerous. This is some kind of joke, Eloise insisted, but her voice had lost its commanding tone. She turned to her sister. Claudette, tell her to stop this. Nonsense. It's true, Eloise, Claudette said quietly, unable to meet her sister's eyes. We've just learned ourselves. The shock on Eloise's face was almost comical. She sank into the hastily provided chair, her usual poise completely shattered. But how? When? You've been coming to our family dinners, sitting there quietly while we discussed business and society matters, and all this time I was running a multi-million-dollar company, I finished for her. Yes, Aunt Eloise. While you and Claudette were planning charity galas and discussing which families were worth knowing, I was building an empire. Diana Carrington Smythe, recovering faster than the others, leaned forward with interest. The Bellissimo Group has been featured in Forbes. There was that article about innovative women in hospitality. That was me, I confirmed, though I gave the interview under my professional name. It's amazing how invisible you can become when people have already decided who you are. Eloise was still struggling to process the information. But you're so quiet at family gatherings. You never speak up about business matters. Because I was never invited to speak. Every time I tried to contribute, I was told to let the men handle business talk or asked about my little hobby restaurant. Margaret Heathers, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. Eloise, didn't you tell me last month that your nephew had married beneath him? That his wife was, how did you put it, sweet but simple? The color drained from Eloise's face. That was before. I didn't know. No, I agreed. You didn't know. None of you bothered to know. You saw what fit your preconceptions and dismissed everything else. Angelo approached with additional place settings, his movements precise and professional. As he arranged the silverware, I noticed how the dynamic at the table had shifted yet again. Where before there had been shock and disbelief, now there was a growing awareness of the magnitude of their miscalculation. I believe, Adam Carrington said, breaking the tense silence, that we're witnessing something rather extraordinary here. Not just a successful business revelation, but a complete dismantling of our social assumptions. Genevieve nodded, her eyes bright with what looked like admiration. Indeed. Jennifer, I must say this is the most interesting dinner party I've attended in years. Carson, who had been notably quiet, finally spoke. Mother, Aunt Eloise, I think you owe Jennifer more than just surprise. You owe her an apology. The sisters exchanged glances, decades of shared superiority crumbling under the weight of their mistake. Eloise, always the more theatrical of the two, was the first to recover her voice. My dear, she said, addressing me directly for perhaps the first time ever, I believe I've been a complete fool. We all have, Claudette added softly. The admission hung in the air, marking a turning point none of us could have anticipated when the evening began. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant dance of service, my staff moving with the precision I'd insisted upon from day one. But at our table, something fundamental had shifted. "Well," I said, allowing myself a small smile, "perhaps we should start over." Would anyone like to hear about our new tasting menu? Chef Marco has created something quite special for tonight. As I signaled for Angelo to bring the special menu, I caught his eye and saw the gleam of satisfaction there. He, like all my staff, had known the truth all along. They'd watched me build this empire while being dismissed by the very people who now sat at my table, stunned by their own blindness. The Catalyst event had done its work. The comfortable assumptions had been shattered, the social hierarchy upended. Now came the interesting part, seeing what would rise from the ruins of their preconceptions. I settled back in my chair, finally feeling the weight of pretense lift from my shoulders. The evening was far from over, but the power had irrevocably shifted. For the first time in 5 years, I was exactly where I belonged, at the head of my own table, in my own establishment, with nothing left to hide. "Now then," I said, looking around at the assembled faces, some family, some formerly superior, all newly humbled. "Shall we really begin this dinner?" As Angelo returned with the special menus, I watched the faces around the table process this new reality. Eloise kept stealing glances at me, as if expecting me to suddenly transform back into the quiet, unremarkable woman she thought she knew. The Carringtons were exchanging meaningful looks, clearly recalibrating their entire understanding of the Foster family dynamics. "Before we continue," I said, accepting my menu from Angelo with a nod, "I think there's something else you should all know." Claudette's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "More surprises, Jennifer?" "Just clarity," I replied. "The Bellissimo Restaurant Group isn't just 5 restaurants in this city. We have locations in New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. Next month, we're opening in London. The Chicago expansion Adam mentioned earlier, that's just one of 6 new properties in development." The silence that followed was profound. Margaret Heathers, who had been Eloise's closest friend for decades, looked between the sisters with poorly concealed judgment. She had always been the most status-conscious of their circle, and I could practically see her recalculating the social hierarchy in real time. "London?" Eloise whispered. "But that would mean the property values alone." "The company is currently valued at approximately $200 million, I said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Though that's a conservative estimate according to our investors." Carson set down his wine glass with a sharp clink. $200 million? Jennifer, we live in a 4-bedroom house in Westchester. We drive a Mercedes. How? Why? Because I never wanted money to define our relationship, I answered honestly. I fell in love with you, Carson, not your family name or social connections. I kept my business separate because I wanted our marriage to be real, not transactional. But all those times Mother made comments about you not contributing financially. Carson's voice trailed off as the implications hit him. Yes, I said simply, all those times. Eloise had recovered enough to find her voice again. This is absolutely extraordinary. Claudette, do you realize what this means? Jennifer isn't just successful. She's one of the most successful restaurateurs in the country. The shift was so sudden it was almost comical. The same woman who had, moments ago, dismissed me as Carson's little wife was now looking at me with something approaching awe. I believe, Diana Carrington Smythe interjected, that we've all been operating under some rather severe misconceptions. Jennifer, I must apologize for my part in that. The Carrington family has always prided itself on recognizing talent and success. We clearly failed in this instance. Adam nodded in agreement. Indeed. I'm rather embarrassed that we've been trying to court your business through intermediaries when we could have simply had a family conversation. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who had considered me unworthy of their social circle were now eager to claim connection to my success. It was human nature, I supposed, but it left a bitter taste nonetheless. There's something else, I continued, deciding to lay all my cards on the table. The Foster Foundation, the charity that funds culinary scholarships for underprivileged youth, the one you've all praised Claudette for supporting so generously? I founded it. I've been its primary donor for 4 years. Claudette's fork clattered to her plate. The Foster Foundation? But I assumed it was some distant relation of Harold's. I named it after Carson's family because I wanted to honor the connection, even if you didn't accept me. Every year, we send 12 students to culinary school, fully funded. 3 of them now work in my restaurants, including Elena, my operations manager. The woman who gave the keynote at last year's charity gala? Margaret asked, her voice faint. The very same. She grew up in foster care, couldn't afford culinary school, and now she oversees operations for a $200 million company. That's what the foundation does. It creates opportunities where none existed. Genevieve was studying me, with new interest. You know, Jennifer, I'm on the board of several charitable organizations. We're always looking for speakers who can inspire with real success stories. Would you consider— Actually, I interrupted gently, I prefer to keep my charitable work private. The foundation isn't about recognition or social capital. It's about giving back in meaningful ways. The subtle rebuke landed perfectly. These were people who treated charity as a social obligation, a way to maintain status and connections. The idea of anonymous giving, of helping without recognition, was foreign to their worldview. Angelo returned with our sommelier, who began describing the wine pairings for the special menu. As he spoke, I noticed how the atmosphere had shifted, yet again. Where before there had been shock and disbelief, now there was a kind of cautious respect, tinged with calculation. The 2015 Chateau Margaux, the sommelier was saying, pairs beautifully with our signature dish. Ms. Hathaway personally selected this vintage during her last trip to Bordeaux. You travel to select wines personally? Eloise asked, her tone now almost reverent. Every quarter, I confirmed. I believe in knowing every aspect of my business intimately, from the farms that supply our produce to the vineyards that stock our cellars. Carson was looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. The trip to France last spring. You said it was for restaurant research. I thought you meant looking at design ideas. I was meeting with suppliers, negotiating exclusive contracts, and studying under a Michelin-starred chef in Lyon. But yes, I also looked at design ideas. The layers of revelation were having a cumulative effect. Each new piece of information forced them to reassess not just what they knew about me, but what they thought they knew about success, social standing, and their own judgment. I must say, Diana mused, this puts rather a different complexion on things. All those family dinners where business was discussed, we missed having the most accomplished business person at the table contributing. Oh, I wouldn't say that, I replied mildly. Carson's legal work is impressive, Adam's import business is thriving. Success takes many forms. But the comparison had been made, and everyone at the table recognized it. In pure financial terms, in terms of business scope and impact, I had surpassed them all. The very metrics they used to measure worth, wealth, influence, social standing, now positioned me at the top of their hierarchy. Claudette, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. Jennifer, I don't know what to say. All these years, I thought I was protecting Carson, protecting our family's reputation. I thought you needed guidance, needed to be molded into someone suitable for our social circle. But I was already who I am, I finished for her. I didn't need molding, Claudette. I needed acceptance. But why hide it? Eloise burst out, unable to contain herself any longer. Why let us believe you were just a homemaker, with a hobby? Do you know how this makes us look? There it was, the heart of their concern. Not remorse for their behavior, not admiration for my accomplishments, but worry about how my revelation reflected on them. How this makes you look. I repeated slowly. Eloise, I didn't hide my success to embarrass you eventually. I kept it private because every time I tried to share it, you dismissed it. You'd already decided who I was, and nothing I said could change that narrative. But surely, if we'd known the scale, Margaret began. Would it have mattered? I challenged. Should someone need to be worth $200 million before they deserve basic respect? Should success be the measure of whether someone is worthy of kindness? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its implications. Around us, the restaurant hummed with its usual elegant efficiency, but our table had become an island of reckoning. No, Claudette said finally, her voice small. No, it shouldn't. It was the first genuinely humble thing I'd ever heard her say. As our eyes met across the table, I saw something I'd never expected, true understanding beginning to dawn in her expression. The foundation of her worldview was cracking, and with it, the possibility of real change emerged. Well then, I said, lifting my wine glass, perhaps we can start fresh. Not as the overlooked daughter-in-law and the dismissive mother-in-law, but as two women who've both learned something tonight. As glasses were raised around the table, I caught Angelo's eye once more. He gave me the smallest nod of approval. The initial revelation was complete, but the real work, the rebuilding of relationships on honest ground, was just beginning, with sauce. The revelations laid bare and the wine poured. I straightened in my chair, feeling the full weight of my authority in this space I had built. The crystal chandelier above cast perfect lighting, something I had specifically designed to make every guest feel like they were dining in their own spotlight. Tonight, that spotlight was mine. Now that we're all acquainted with the reality of the situation, I began, allowing a small pause for the words to settle. I'd like to share something about the vision behind Bellissimo. Eloise, still visibly shaken but trying to maintain her composure, leaned forward. Please do, dear. I'm absolutely fascinated. The endearment that once would have dripped with condescension now carried an awkward attempt at warmth. I noted it, but didn't acknowledge it. Every Bellissimo location is designed around a simple principle. Everyone who walks through our doors should feel valued, regardless of their background or bank account. I let my gaze travel around the table. It's why we have a community table at each restaurant where single diners are welcome to join others. It's why our prix-fixe menu is priced accessibly, while our a la carte options cater to more discerning palates. Claudette shifted uncomfortably, no doubt remembering her numerous comments about those people who couldn't appreciate fine dining. The name Bellissimo wasn't chosen just for its meaning, most beautiful in Italian, but for what it represents. Beauty in diversity, in inclusion, in recognizing that worth isn't determined by pedigree. I stood, my movement commanding attention. Angelo, would you please bring out the special dessert? Of course, Ms. Hathaway. I walked to the window overlooking the kitchen, where my staff worked with precision and pride. 6 years ago, I hired my first employee, Maria. She was a single mother who'd been turned down by every high-end restaurant in the city because she had a thick accent and no formal training. Today, she's the head pastry chef at our Manhattan location. I turned back to face the table. Angelo himself was working 3 jobs to support his family when I met him. Now he manages this flagship restaurant and is part owner of our newest location. The message was clear. I built my empire by valuing people others had dismissed, just as they had dismissed me. This is all very admirable, Eloise said carefully. But surely you must have had some guidance? Investors? Someone must have helped you understand the business world. Actually, I replied, returning to my seat. My first investor was my mother. She mortgaged her house, the one she'd worked 2 jobs for 20 years to buy, to give me my start. She believed in me when no one else did. Claudette flinched. The contrast between my working-class mother's faith and her own wealthy skepticism was impossible to ignore. The second investor was a woman I met at a small business conference. She saw my business plan and offered to mentor me. She said I reminded her of herself, someone who had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Adam Carrington cleared his throat. And now you're one of the most successful restaurateurs in the country. It's quite remarkable. Success is remarkable when you start with nothing, I agreed. When you start with everything, I gestured, subtly around the table. It's simply expected. The uncomfortable truth settled over the dinner party like a heavy blanket. These were people who had inherited their positions, married into their wealth, or built upon substantial family foundations. I had created something from sheer will and determination. Angelo arrived with dessert, my signature creation, a deconstructed tiramisu that told a story on the plate. The traditional elements were reimagined. Espresso-soaked ladyfingers transformed into delicate tuiles, mascarpone reimagined as a cloud-like foam, cocoa dust arranged like an artist's brushstroke. This dessert, I explained as plates were set before each guest, represents transformation. Traditional elements reimagined, elevated, but honoring their humble origins. It's a metaphor for what we do here. Margaret Heathers took a tentative bite, her eyes widening. This is extraordinary. Thank you. The recipe comes from my grandmother, my mother's mother. She cleaned houses for wealthy families and made traditional tiramisu for their dinner parties. They loved it, but never invited her to sit at their tables. The pointed comment landed with precision. Claudette's spoon trembled slightly against her plate. I invited her to sit at mine, I continued. In fact, she was my first official taste tester when I was developing the menu. She died 2 years ago, but her influence is in every dish we serve. Carson reached for my hand under the table, the first genuine gesture of connection he'd made all evening. You never told me that story. You never asked about my family's recipes. Or my family, really. The truth of it hung between us, years of missed opportunities and dismissed heritage suddenly visible in the space between our joined hands. I suppose, Genevieve said thoughtfully, we've all been rather limited in our perspectives. The question is, what do we do now? It was the opening I'd been waiting for. I released Carson's hand and stood again, this time with the authority of someone who owned not just the restaurant, but the entire narrative. What happens now is simple. We finish this lovely dinner, we enjoy the food, and perhaps even each other's company. And then, tomorrow, we all decide what kind of relationships we want to build based on truth rather than assumptions. I walked to the head of the table, a position I'd never been allowed at family dinners, and placed my hands on the back of the empty chair there. But let me be clear about something. I didn't reveal myself tonight to punish anyone or to gloat. I did it because I'm tired of fragmenting myself to fit into boxes that were never designed for someone like me. I am Jennifer Hathaway. I am Carson's wife. I am a successful businesswoman. I am the daughter of a single mother who worked 2 jobs. All of these things are true, and I'm done pretending any one of them defines me more than the others. Eloise dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, a gesture that might have been theatrical or might have been genuine. With her, it was always hard to tell. My dear, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I believe we've been absolute fools. Perhaps, I conceded. But the wonderful thing about foolishness is that we can choose to stop at any moment. I signaled to Angelo, who approached with a bottle of champagne, the 1996 Dom Perignon I'd been saving for a special occasion. I propose a toast, I announced as Angelo expertly opened the bottle. To new beginnings, to seeing people as they truly are, not as we assume them to be, and to the courage it takes to shatter our own preconceptions. As the champagne was poured, I noticed the subtle shifts in body language around the table. Claudette sat straighter, but without her usual rigidity. Carson watched me with something like awe, perhaps seeing for the first time the woman he'd married rather than the one his family had convinced him existed. The Carringtons exchanged glances that spoke of revised business plans and new opportunities. To Jennifer, Adam Carrington raised his glass, and to the humble pie we're all eating tonight, though I must say even that tastes excellent in your establishment. Laughter rippled around the table, genuine this time, not the polite society. Titter I'd grown accustomed to. To Jennifer, others echoed, and I felt the power of the moment, not the power of revenge or vindication, but the power of finally being seen. As we drank, I caught sight of myself in the mirror behind the bar. The woman looking back wasn't the quiet, accommodating daughter-in-law who had entered this restaurant hours ago. She was someone who had taken control of her narrative, who had built something remarkable not to prove her worth to others, but to honor her own vision. Now, I said, setting down my champagne flute, who would like to hear about our new charity initiative? We're launching a program to help immigrant families start food businesses. I thought perhaps, Claudette, with your connections to the city, planning committee, you might be interested in being involved? The olive branch was extended with grace, but on my terms. Claudette's eyes widened with surprise and, for the first time, genuine interest that had nothing to do with social climbing. Yes, I would be very interested, she said quietly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning, and beginnings, I had learned, were where all the best transformations started. As the champagne bubbles danced in our glasses, I decided it was time to reveal the full scope of what I had built. The initial shock had worn off, and now I could see calculation in their eyes, particularly in Eloise and the Carringtons. They were already trying to figure out how to leverage this new information. Since we're being honest tonight, I said, settling back into my chair, there's more you should know about the Bellissimo Group. More? Claudette's voice was faint, as if she couldn't imagine how the revelations could possibly deepen. The restaurants are just the flagship. We also own a culinary equipment supply company, a farm-to-table produce distribution network, and a hospitality consulting firm. The London location? It's not just a restaurant, it's a culinary institute. We're launching the first international branch of the Foster Foundation there. Adam Carrington nearly choked on his champagne. A vertical integration of the entire hospitality supply chain. Brilliant. Wait, Carson interjected, his legal mind finally engaging. The distribution network, is that Highland Farms Collective? The one that supplies organic produce to half the restaurants in the city? And 3 other states, I confirmed. We started it to ensure quality control for our own restaurants, then expanded when other establishments wanted access to our suppliers. Eloise set down her glass with deliberate care. Jennifer, darling, this isn't just a restaurant empire. This is a conglomerate. The correct term would be a hospitality ecosystem, I corrected gently. Every component supports and strengthens the others. The consulting firm helps other restaurants improve their operations. The equipment company ensures quality tools at reasonable prices. The distribution network connects small farmers with high-end establishments. It's about lifting the entire industry. I stood and walked to a discreet panel on the wall, pressing a hidden button. A screen descended silently, displaying a presentation I'd prepared months ago for a different audience, potential investors who never needed to materialize because our growth had been entirely self-funded. This is our current corporate structure, I said, advancing to the first slide. The organizational chart was complex, with Bellissimo at the center and various subsidiaries branching out like spokes on a wheel. Margaret Heathers gasped audibly. The Sentinel Hotel Group. You own that too? We acquired it last year. They had beautiful properties but terrible restaurant management. Now all Sentinel hotels feature Bellissimo restaurants, and their occupancy rates have increased by 40%. Diana? Carrington Smythe was furiously taking notes on her phone. The vertical integration is impressive, but the brand synergy is absolutely masterful. Jennifer, have you considered taking the company public? Several investment banks have approached us, I admitted. But I prefer to maintain control. When you go public, you answer to shareholders who care about quarterly profits. I answer to my vision and my employees. Claudette was staring at the screen as if it might disappear if she blinked. The children's cooking program, Little Chef's Academy. That's yours too? A passion project, I smiled. We run free cooking classes for underprivileged children in all our markets. Some of our best young chefs discovered their calling in those classes. It's about creating opportunities, not just serving meals. I advanced to the next slide, showing our global expansion plans. Red pins marked current locations, blue pins indicated sites under construction, and green pins showed future targets. By 2027, we project presence in 15 major markets across 4 continents. Each location will include the full ecosystem, restaurant, training facility, and community programs. This is unprecedented, Adam murmured. The scope, the integration, the social responsibility component. Jennifer, you've built something extraordinary. I built something necessary, I corrected. The hospitality industry is notorious for exploitation, waste, and inequality. I wanted to prove it could be done differently, profitably, and ethically. Carson was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of awe, regret, and something that might have been fear. The late nights, the weekend trips, the mysterious phone calls. You were building all of this? While you were building your law career, yes. We both had our ambitions, Carson. The difference was, I supported yours publicly while pursuing mine privately. The weight of that statement settled over the table. Carson's family had celebrated every promotion, every case win, every professional achievement of his, while dismissing mine as a hobby. There's something else, I continued, advancing to the final slide. It showed an architectural rendering of a stunning complex. This is the Jennifer Hathaway Culinary Center, breaking ground next spring in Chicago. It will be the largest culinary education facility in the Midwest, offering full scholarships to 200 students annually. Jennifer Hathaway, Eloise repeated slowly. Not Foster. My professional name. The name I built this empire under. The name my mother gave me. The implications rippled through the room. I hadn't just built a business. I had built an identity, entirely separate from the Foster name and all it represented. But the expense, Claudette said weakly. The risk? How did you manage it all without anyone knowing? I returned to my seat, switching off the presentation. I had help, investors who believed in the vision, mentors who guided me, employees who became family. What I didn't have was anyone at this table telling me I couldn't do it, because none of you knew I was trying. That's not entirely fair, Carson protested. If you had told us, what would you have done differently? I challenged. Would you have stood up to your mother when she called my work cute? Would you have defended me when your aunt suggested I should focus on being a proper society wife? His silence was answer. Enough. I didn't build this to spite anyone, I continued. I built it because I had a vision of what the hospitality industry could be. Inclusive, sustainable, empowering. The fact that I had to do it in secret is an indictment of the environment I was living in, not the dream I was pursuing. Angelo approached with coffee service, the ritual providing a moment of respite from the intensity of the revelations. As he poured, I noticed him exchange a glance with several other staff members who had found reasons to pass by our table. They knew they were witnessing history, the moment their boss finally claimed her power publicly. The Foster Foundation, Genevieve said suddenly. You named it after Carson's family even though you dismissed me? Yes, because I believe in honoring connections, even difficult ones. And because I hoped that someday, The family that name represented might live up to the values the foundation embodies. Values we clearly failed to demonstrate, Claudette admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Values can be learned, I offered. The question is whether you're willing to learn them. The challenge hung in the air as coffee was served. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant dance, but at our table, foundations were shifting, assumptions crumbling, and a new reality taking shape. I think, Eloise said finally, we have a great deal to learn. It was the first truly humble statement I'd ever heard from her. As I raised my coffee cup, I wondered if perhaps this revelation might accomplish what years of silent endurance never could. Genuine change in how they saw not just me, but everyone they encountered. Well, I said, allowing myself a small smile, I happen to know an excellent teacher. The deepening revelations had done their work. Now came the harder part, rebuilding relationships on foundation of truth rather than assumptions. But for the first time in 5 years, I believed it might actually be possible. As the coffee service continued, I noticed Claudette's eyes fixed on a painting hanging near our table, one of many I'd personally selected for the restaurant. Her scrutiny triggered memories I'd long kept compartmentalized. That painting, she said softly. It looks like... Is that a Rothko? A Rothko study, actually, I confirmed. One of his lesser-known works from 1949. I found it in a small gallery in Minneapolis. Minneapolis? Carson looked up sharply. When were you in... I grew up there, I reminded him gently. It was telling that after 5 years of marriage, he still forgot basic details about my background. In fact, that gallery was 3 blocks from the diner where my mother worked her second job. I stood and walked closer to the painting, remembering. I used to do my homework at the counter of that diner while Mom finished her shifts. The owner, Mrs. Chen, would save broken fortune cookies for me. Said broken cookies still held good fortune. They just needed someone to believe in them. The eye. Metaphor wasn't lost on anyone at the table. One evening when I was 15, this businessman came in. He was clearly wealthy, expensive suit, gold watch. He ordered the cheapest item on the menu and spent 3 hours making it last, just like I did with my homework. Turned out he'd just lost everything in a bad investment. I touched the frame of the painting lightly. He told me something that night. Success isn't about never falling. It's about knowing how to rebuild when everything crumbles. 2 years later, I saw his picture in Forbes. He'd built an even bigger empire from scratch. What was his name? Adam asked, his business instincts engaged. Richard Sterling. He became my first mentor years later. But that night, he was just a broken man finding comfort in a $3.99 plate of hash browns. I returned to my seat, memories flooding back. My mother worked 16-hour days to keep us afloat after my father left. She was a nurse at the hospital during the day and waited tables at night. I spent more time in that diner than I did at home. Carson reached for my hand. You never told me about your father leaving. You never asked about my father at all, I said gently, but pointedly. Neither did anyone else at this table. The uncomfortable truth settled over the dinner guests. In their world of established families and generational wealth, single-parent households were anomalies to be politely ignored rather than experiences to be understood. When I was 17, I continued, Mom collapsed during her shift at the hospital. Exhaustion, the doctor said. But I knew it was more than that. It was years of working herself to the bone so I could have opportunities she never did. Claudette shifted in her chair, her designer jewelry catching the light. Jewelry worth more than my mother's annual salary at both jobs combined. That's when I decided I'd create something of my own. Something that no one could take away. Something that would make sure my mother never had to work 2 jobs again. And did you? Eloise asked softly. Make sure she didn't have to work? She retired at 55, I said with quiet pride. Lives in a beautiful house overlooking Lake Minnetonka. Now, she volunteers at the hospital where she used to work, reading to patients, bringing flowers. She says it's nice to walk those halls without exhaustion weighing down every step. I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo of my mother, a vibrant woman with silver-streaked hair and my smile, standing in a garden full of roses. She grew up picking cotton in Mississippi, I said. Moved north at 18 with $20 and a high school diploma. Everything I learned about hard work, I learned from her. Carson studied the photo. She's beautiful. She has your eyes. I have her eyes, I corrected softly. And her determination. When everyone else saw a single mother waiting tables, she saw herself as an architect of possibilities. Diana leaned forward. What did she say when you told her about your first restaurant? She said, Baby, I always knew you'd feed people somehow. Just didn't know it would be fancy food instead of Band-Aids. I smiled at the memory. She was my first investor, remember? Mortgaged her house without hesitation. When I protested, she said, Jennifer, I've been investing in you since the day you were born. This is just another deposit. The story hung in the air, a stark contrast to the world of trust funds and family money that surrounded this table. My success hadn't been built on connections or inherited wealth, but on the sacrifices of a woman who believed in dreams she couldn't afford to have for herself. When I met Carson at that charity gala, I said, looking at my husband, I was there because one of my restaurant clients had an extra ticket. I'd been working 18-hour days, barely sleeping. But I went because Mom always said opportunities come to those who show up, even when they're tired. I remembered that night. How out of place I'd felt among the gowns and tuxedos. How Carson had been the only person who'd asked what I did, rather than who my family was. You told me you admired ambition, I reminded him. Said you were tired of meeting people who'd never worked for anything. I meant it, he said quietly. I know you did. But somewhere between that first dance and our wedding, your family convinced you that my ambition was charming rather than serious. A phase I'd grow out of once I settled into being a foster. The truth of it sat heavy between us. Love had been real, but so had the gradual erosion of respect, the slow dismissal of dreams that didn't fit the foster family mold. My mother couldn't come to our wedding, I said, addressing the table. She was working a double shift to help pay for my grandmother's medical bills. Claudette, you said it was unfortunate that my family couldn't prioritize the important moments. Do you remember? Claudette's face flushed. I may have said something like that. You did. And that's when I decided I'd build something so significant that no one could ever dismiss my family's priorities again. Every decision I've made since then has been with that promise in mind. I looked around the table at these people who had deemed themselves arbiters of worth and value. My beginning wasn't what you're used to. It wasn't preparatory schools and summer homes. It was watching my mother count pennies to buy milk and studying by the light of a diner sign. But those beginnings taught me something your world never could. That worth isn't inherited. It's earned. One double shift, one sacrifice, one dream at a time. The silence that followed was different from earlier. Not shocked, but contemplative. Perhaps for the first time, they were seeing not just my success, but the foundation of character it was built upon. Your mother, Eloise said finally, sounds like quite a remarkable woman. She is, I agreed. And she'd probably serve you all hash browns and tell you exactly what she thinks of people who judge others by their bank accounts. The image broke the tension, allowing for gentle laughter. But the lesson had been delivered. I wasn't just revealing my business success. I was revealing the values that had made it possible, values that stood in stark contrast to everything they had believed about success and worth. The beginning of my story was not something to be hidden or ashamed of. It was the very thing that had made everything else possible. Do you remember our third date? I asked Carson, watching his face carefully. You took me to that French restaurant, Le Bernardin, and I ordered the wrong wine with fish? Carson's expression softened. You ordered a Cabernet with Dover sole. The sommelier looked like he might faint. And you, I continued, switched your order to steak just so my wine choice would make sense. You told the sommelier I was teaching you about bold pairings. You noticed that? He seemed genuinely surprised. I noticed everything, just like I noticed how that kindness slowly disappeared once your family started their campaign. Genevieve leaned forward, intrigued. Campaign? Oh, yes, I said, warming to the memory. It started subtly. Claudette would send Carson articles about suitable careers for executive wives. Eloise would mention how her daughter-in-law had given up her little hobby to focus on family. Claudette had the grace to look uncomfortable. We were only trying to help. Were you? Because what I remember is a systematic effort to remake me into your image of a proper foster wife. I stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. 6 months after our wedding, I was offered a position as head chef at Bistro Moderne. Do you remember what happened, Carson? He shifted in his seat. We discussed it. No, your mother discussed it. At Sunday dinner, in front of the entire family, she said, and I quote, "Surely Carson's wife won't be working in a kitchen like common help." I didn't mean, Claudette started. But you did mean it, I interrupted gently. And Carson, instead of defending my career, suggested I take up charity work instead. More appropriate, you said. The hours were brutal, he defended weakly. You would have been working nights, weekends. I work those hours now. The difference is, now I'm working for myself instead of trying to prove myself to people who'd already decided I wasn't worth the effort. Diana Carrington Smythe cleared her throat. When did you start planning your own restaurant? The night of that dinner. I realized I had 2 choices: give up my dreams to fit your mold, or build something so undeniable that even you couldn't dismiss it. I returned to the table. But the relationship erosion had already begun. Carson, do you remember our first anniversary? I made you a 5-course meal, spent 3 days preparing it. Your mother called during dessert to remind you about some family obligation, and you left. There was a crisis at the firm. There's always a crisis when it comes to choosing between your family's demands and our marriage. I served that beautiful meal to an empty chair and made a decision. Eloise straightened. What decision? To succeed so completely that I'd never feel that small again. But more importantly, to do it without sacrificing who I was. I met Carson's eyes. You fell in love with an ambitious woman who wasn't afraid to work hard. Then you tried to turn me into someone who'd be content arranging flowers and hosting tea parties. That's not fair, he protested. I supported your interests, as long as they remained small enough not to threaten your family's image of what I should be. Remember when Food and Wine wanted to feature my home cooking? You asked me to decline because it might be embarrassing to have your wife in a food magazine. Margaret Heathers gasped softly. She was the type who would have framed such an article. Every milestone in our relationship became a battle, I continued. When I wanted to invest our savings in my first location, you insisted we needed your mother's approval for any major financial decision. That's standard in our family, Claudette interjected. In your family, perhaps, but I wasn't raised to ask permission to pursue my dreams. So I used my inheritance from my grandmother, all $50,000 of it, and bought that first location without telling any of you. The place on Maple Street, Carson said suddenly. You said you were helping a friend with their restaurant. I was helping myself. By then, I'd learned that the only way to protect my dreams from your family's interference was to keep them secret. I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo from our wedding day. Look at this picture. Really look at it. See how I'm standing slightly apart? How your family forms a closed circle that I'm adjacent to but not part of. That's how our entire marriage has felt. But we invited you to everything, Eloise protested. You invited me to attend. You never invited me to belong. There's a difference. I put the phone away. Do you know when I truly gave up on being accepted by this family? The day Claudette introduced me to her book club as Carson's wife, who used to work in restaurants. Used to? Adam caught the implication immediately. Yes. She'd already decided my career was past tense, even though I was actively building my empire. That's when I realized you all saw what you wanted to see, not what was actually there. Carson reached across the table. Jennifer, I'm sorry. I should have seen what was happening. You did see it, I said quietly. You just chose your family's comfort over your wife's dignity. Every single time. The words landed with devastating accuracy. Around us, the restaurant continued its service, my staff moving with graceful efficiency through a space I'd designed to make everyone feel welcome, the opposite of what I'd experienced in my marriage. So our relationship became a dual existence, I concluded. The public version where I played the accommodating wife, and the private reality where I built an empire while you slept. One of us was living authentically. The other was performing, a role assigned by family expectations. Carson's face showed the full weight of understanding. I didn't lose you tonight, did I? I lost you years ago. You lost the version of me willing to shrink herself, I corrected. The question is, do you want to know the woman I've become? The turning point, I said, my voice steady but charged with memory, came exactly 3 years ago today. It was at your cousin Michael's wedding reception, Claudette. Do you remember? Claudette's fingers tightened around her napkin. Of course, the Plaza Ballroom. It was lovely. Lovely, yes. And revealing. I walked to the bar and poured myself a glass of water, needing the moment to compose myself. I was seated at table 17, the overflow table with the children's nannies and the wedding planner's assistant. Carson's head snapped up. What? But I was at the head table with my family. Exactly. The seating arrangements somehow got mixed up, according to your mother. But I overheard her telling the coordinator that it was better this way, less confusing for the society photographers. Eloise had the decency to look uncomfortable. Claudette, you didn't— I heard everything, I continued calmly. Including your conversation with Mrs. Vanderberg about how Carson had married down, but the family was making the best of it. The silence was deafening. Carson's face had gone pale. But that wasn't the turning point. No, that came when the Vanderberg's daughter asked who I was, and you said, Do you remember what you said, Claudette? She shook her head mutely. You said, Oh, that's just Jennifer. She married my son. We're still hoping she'll settle into our way of life eventually. I set down my water glass with deliberate care. That's when I decided I was done hoping for acceptance. Done trying to settle in. That night, I went home and made 3 phone calls. To whom? Diana asked, genuinely curious. The first to a commercial real estate agent about a property I'd been considering. The second to an investor who'd been courting me for months. The third to my lawyer to set up Bellissimo Restaurant Group as a corporation. I returned to the table. Within 6 months, I opened my first location. Within a year, I had 3. And I did it all without asking permission, seeking approval, or dimming my light to make others comfortable. Carson was staring at me. That's why you were so distant after Michael's wedding. I thought you were just tired. I was tired. Tired of being invisible in my own marriage. Tired of being treated like an inconvenient +1 at family events. That wedding was my awakening. Claudette's voice was barely a whisper. I never meant to hurt you. Intent and impact are different things, Claudette. Your intent may have been to protect your family's image. The impact was showing me exactly where I stood, or rather, where I didn't stand, in this family. I looked around at their faces, shocked, remorseful, calculating. That night at table 17, surrounded by people the Fosters deemed unworthy of the main reception, I found my truth. I wasn't going to waste my life seeking validation from people who'd already decided I didn't deserve it. Angelo approached, quietly. "Ms. Hathaway, shall I prepare the private dining room for coffee service?" "No, thank you, Angelo. I think we're fine here." As he withdrew, I noticed Eloise dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. "We've been absolutely horrible to you." "You've been exactly who you are," I said evenly. "The question now is, who do you want to become?" The turning point in my story had passed. Now we were approaching theirs. The weight of the past hung heavy as I prepared to reveal the final piece of my empire. I walked to the maitre d' station and retrieved a sleek folder I'd kept there for this very moment. "Since we're being completely transparent tonight," I began, returning to the table, "there's one more thing you should know about the Bellissimo Group." Carson's shoulders tensed. "More?" I opened the folder, revealing architectural plans and financial projections. "The Foster Building, that historic property downtown that your family has been trying to acquire for 3 years. I bought it 6 months ago." Claudette's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. "That's impossible. We had exclusive negotiating rights, which expired when you failed to meet the seller's terms." I stepped in with a cash offer the next day. I spread the plans across the table. "It's going to be our flagship headquarters, 12 floors of office space, test kitchens, a public market on the ground floor, and a rooftop restaurant with a garden that will supply our herbs and vegetables." Carson studied the plans, his lawyer's eye catching the details. This must have cost $40 million, I confirmed. Cash. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Even for the Fosters, with their old money and established wealth, $40 million in liquid assets was significant. "But that building," Claudette said faintly, "has been in negotiations with Foster Enterprises for years. How did you even know about it?" "Because I was in the room when you discussed it at last year's Christmas dinner. You called it your dream project, the crown jewel that would cement the Foster legacy in this city's history." I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo of the building's facade. "The seller, Mrs. Chen, is the daughter of the woman who owned the diner where I did my homework as a child. She remembered me. When she heard a Foster wanted her building, she asked if I was related to the family trying to lowball her. I told her the truth, that I was married to your son but built my business without your name. And she sold it to you instead," Carson said quietly. "She sold it to someone who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. Someone who wouldn't just preserve the building but would honor its history while creating opportunity for others." I turned to a page showing the planned community programs. "The ground floor market will feature stalls for immigrant food vendors, subsidized rent for the first year. The test kitchens will be available to culinary students for evening classes. The rooftop garden will employ formerly homeless individuals through our job training program." Adam Carrington let out a low whistle. "This isn't just a headquarters, it's a social enterprise disguised as a commercial project." "Everything I build serves multiple purposes," I said. "Profit and purpose aren't mutually exclusive. They're mutually reinforcing." Claudette was staring at the plans with something like grief. "We had such plans for that building." "I know. Luxury condos on the upper floors, high-end retail below, maximum profit, minimal community benefit. Mrs. Chen said that's exactly why she chose my offer over yours." I closed the folder and looked around the table. "The Bellissimo Group isn't just bigger than you imagined. It's fundamentally different. While you were focused on preserving status and tradition, I was building something that creates opportunities for people like my younger self." Diana leaned forward. "When does the project break ground?" "The announcement is next week. The press release will mention that Jennifer Hathaway, founder and CEO of Bellissimo Restaurant Group, acquired the historic Foster building for a mixed-use development focused on culinary innovation and community empowerment. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The building they'd coveted for years would now bear witness to my success, not theirs. "You've essentially built a shadow empire," Eloise said slowly, "right under our noses." "Not a shadow empire," I corrected. "A parallel one. One based on different values, different priorities, and definitely different definitions of success." Carson was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're not just successful, Jennifer. You're formidable." "I'm the same person I always was," I said. "You just never bothered to look closely enough to see it." I glanced at my watch, a simple timepiece, not the ostentatious jewelry favored by the Foster women. "The evening service will be ending soon. You're all welcome to stay for our nightly tradition." "What tradition?" Genevieve asked. "Every night at closing, my staff gathers in the kitchen. We share leftover bread and wine while discussing the day's service, what worked, what didn't, how we can improve. I sit with them, not at the head of the table, but as part of the team." I stood, straightening my jacket. "It's how I built this empire, by listening to people others ignored, valuing opinions others dismissed, and remembering that every successful service depends on every single person doing their part." The message was clear. My success wasn't just financial, it was philosophical. While they had built walls, I had built bridges. While they had preserved hierarchy, I had fostered collaboration. "You're welcome to join us," I offered. Though, fair warning, we discuss everything from proper seasoning to fair wages. It might not be the kind of after-dinner conversation you're used to. As I moved toward the kitchen, I wondered if any of them would follow. The full revelation was complete. I hadn't just built a business empire. I'd built a completely different way of being successful, one that challenged everything they believed, about power, privilege, and purpose. I paused at the kitchen entrance, turning back to face the table one more time. "Before we adjourn, there's something I need to say directly." The gravity in my voice made everyone straighten in their chairs. "For 5 years, I've carried the weight of your dismissal. Every snide comment, every excluded invitation, every time. You introduced me as Carson's wife, instead of by my name. I remember them all." I walked back to the table, placing my hands on my chair. "Do you remember Christmas 2 years ago, Claudette? When you gave everyone personalized ornaments with their greatest achievements? Carson said star lawyer. Eloise's said society's finest. Mine said supportive wife." Claudette's face flushed. "It was meant as a compliment. It was meant to put me in my place, just like the time you forgot to invite me to the Foster Foundation Gala, the foundation I secretly funded. Or when you told the country club membership committee that I wasn't quite ready for full privileges." Carson looked stricken. "Mother, you said Jennifer declined the club invitation." "No," I corrected. "She withdrew my application without telling either of us." Eloise shifted uncomfortably. "Jennifer, dear, these are all misunderstandings, are they? What about the family portrait last year? The photographer you hired was specifically instructed to position me slightly behind everyone else. For better composition, you claimed." I pulled out my phone and showed them the photo. "Look carefully. Every Foster is in sharp focus. I'm slightly blurred, literally pushed to the background of your family narrative." "That was just technical," Claudette began. "No, it was intentional. Just like every other slight, every dismissal, every attempt to remind me that I didn't belong." I locked eyes with my mother-in-law. "You were so afraid I'd diminish the Foster name that you couldn't see I was elevating it in ways you never imagined." Carson stood up abruptly. "Enough, Mother, Aunt Eloise, is this true? All of it?" The silence that followed was damning. "My God," he whispered. "I've been blind, haven't I? All those times you complained about headaches and couldn't come to family dinners, Jennifer. You weren't sick. You were protecting yourself." "I was surviving," I said quietly. Building my empire became my refuge from a family that saw me as an intruder rather than a member. Genevieve cleared her throat. This goes beyond mere snobbery. This is systematic emotional abuse. I wouldn't call it abuse, I said carefully. I'd call it the casual cruelty of people who've never had to question their place in the world. But intent doesn't erase impact. I looked at each face around the table. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about finally standing in my truth. You didn't just underestimate me. You tried to erase me. And instead of disappearing, I became someone impossible to ignore. Claudette's voice was barely audible. What have we done? The question is, I said, gathering the architectural plans. What will you do now? Because I'm done hiding my light to make you comfortable. The Jennifer Hathaway you tried to diminish? She's the most powerful person at this table, and she's just getting started. Straightened, my voice firm but not unkind. I've built my empire. Now you need to decide if you want to be part of my world. A world where worth isn't inherited but earned. Where respect isn't assumed but given freely. Where success is measured by how many people you lift up, not how many you keep down. Confrontation was complete. Years of buried truth had finally surfaced, leaving us all to reckon with what came next. The silence that followed my words was profound. Claudette's perfectly composed facade had crumbled entirely, leaving a woman who looked suddenly older, fragile. Her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass, missing it on the first attempt. I don't know what to say, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. All these years I thought I was protecting our family's reputation. Instead, I was destroying my relationship with my daughter-in-law. You were doing both, Carson said, his voice hard with newfound understanding. You were so obsessed with our family's image that you couldn't see the incredible woman I married, and I let you. God help me, I let you. Eloise dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. We've been monsters, haven't we? Sitting here in your restaurant, enjoying your success while having spent years trying to make you small. Not monsters, I said. Just people trapped in your own narrow worldview. The tragedy isn't what you did to me, it's what you missed by not knowing me. Adam Carrington spoke up, his business mind processing the implications. The Foster family just alienated one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the city. In our social circles, when this gets out, that's exactly the wrong lesson to take from this, Genevieve interrupted sharply. This isn't about social embarrassment or missed business opportunities. This is about fundamental human decency. Claudette looked up at me, mascara streaking her cheeks. Your mother, the woman who worked 2 jobs? She must despise us. Actually, she doesn't know much about you, I said. I protected her from your judgment just as I protected myself from your cruelty. She knows I married Carson and that his family is prominent. That's all. Protecting her from us, Eloise repeated slowly. How did we become people others need protection from? Carson moved around the table to stand beside me. Jennifer, I failed you. Not just as a husband, but as a human being. I saw what they were doing, and I chose comfort over courage. Every single time. Yes, I agreed simply. You did. He flinched but didn't look away. Can you ever forgive me? Forgiveness isn't the question right now. The question is whether you're capable of becoming someone different from who you've been. Margaret Heathers, who had been silent for most of the evening, finally spoke. I've known Claudette and Eloise for 40 years. I've watched them exclude dozens of people they deemed unworthy. But this is different. You didn't just survive. Their dismissal. You transcended it. I did what my mother taught me, I said. I turned broken fortune cookies into blessings. Your rejection became my motivation. Your blindness gave me freedom to build without interference. Claudette straightened in her chair, attempting to gather what remained of her dignity. Jennifer, I owe you an apology that I know I can never adequately express. Every slight, every exclusion, every moment I made you feel less than... I was wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But apologies without change are just words. The test will be how you treat the next person who doesn't fit your preconceived notions. Eloise nodded slowly. You're right. We need to earn the right to be in your life, not assume it. The reckoning was real, but I knew better than to mistake momentary remorse for lasting change. These were people who'd spent lifetimes believing in their own superiority. One dinner, however revelatory, couldn't undo decades of ingrained behavior. Have a proposal, Carson said suddenly. Family therapy, all of us. If you're willing, Jennifer. If we're going to rebuild anything from this wreckage, we need professional help. I studied his face, seeing genuine determination for the first time in years. I'll consider it. But understand this, I'm not the one who needs fixing. I'm whole. You're the ones who need to confront why you equated worth with pedigree. Angelo approached discreetly. Ms. Hathaway, the kitchen staff is ready for the evening. Meeting whenever you are. I nodded, then addressed the table one final time. This has been illuminating. But now I have a business to run and people who actually value me waiting. You're welcome to stay and finish your coffee. As I turned to go, Claudette's voice stopped me. Jennifer? Will we see you again? I looked back at the woman who'd spent 5 years trying to erase me. That depends entirely on who you choose to become. The reckoning was complete. Now came the harder part, watching to see if recognition would lead to real change, or if old habits would reassert themselves once the shock wore off. I stood at the threshold between the dining room and kitchen, knowing my next words would define whatever future might exist for these relationships. If we're going to move forward, and that's still an if, there need to be clear terms, I said, turning back to face them. This isn't a negotiation. These are my conditions. Carson straightened, his lawyer instincts engaging. What kind of terms? First, I will never again hide my success or dim my light to make any of you comfortable. The Jennifer who sat quietly while you discussed business? She's gone forever. Claudette nodded quickly. Of course, we would never ask. Second, I continued, not allowing her easy agreement, my mother is off limits for your society gossip. When she visits, she'll be treated with the same respect you show your country club friends. Any snide remarks about her background or charming simplicity will end our relationship permanently. Your mother should be welcomed as family, Carson said firmly. I'm ashamed she hasn't been already. Third, I'm establishing a board of directors for the Bellissimo Group. I'm offering you a position, Claudette, not because you're family, but because your knowledge of this city's power structures could be valuable. However, you'd report to my board, not the other way around. Claudette's eyes widened. You want me to work for you? I want you to work with me. There's a difference, but you'd need to earn your place like everyone else. No special treatment because you're my mother-in-law. Eloise cleared her throat. And the rest of us? You're welcome to attend company events as guests, but any business involvement must be earned through merit, not marriage. I paused, letting that sink in. Fourth, I expect public acknowledgement, the next Foster Foundation. Gala will include the truth about its funding source. No more letting people think it's old Foster money being generous. That seems fair, Carson said quietly. Fifth, and this is non-negotiable, therapy. Not just family sessions, but individual work. You all need to understand why you equate worth with pedigree and why you felt entitled to remake me in your image. Diana. Carrington Smythe nodded approvingly. It's not unlike a business rehabilitation plan, clear metrics for improvement. Sixth, my charitable choices remain mine alone. When I fund scholarships for immigrant families or support progressive causes you might find unsuitable, You will not interfere or express disapproval. Claudette flinched slightly but nodded. Finally, I said, drawing myself up to my full height. I need one thing from each of you before we can move forward. I need to hear what you actually saw in me these past 5 years. Not what you see now that you know about my success, but what you saw when you thought I was nobody. The silence that followed was heavy with discomfort. Claudette went first, her voice barely audible. I saw someone who threatened our way of life. Someone who might expose that our sophistication was just surface. I saw someone I was jealous of, Eloise admitted. You had Carson's love in a way I never had my own husband's. Carson's voice cracked. I saw someone I was afraid to defend because it meant standing up to my family. I saw my own cowardice reflected back at me every time you sat quietly through their insults. Genevieve spoke unexpectedly. I saw someone I avoided getting to know because Claudette had already declared you unworthy. I took the easy path of agreeing. And you, Adam? I asked. I saw a missed opportunity, he said honestly. Every time you tried to speak about business and were shut down, I wondered what insights we were losing. I nodded, appreciating their honesty even as it stung. Thank you for that truth. It's the first honest conversation we've had as a family. Does this mean you accept us? Claudette asked hopefully. It means I accept that change is possible, I corrected. Whether you achieve it remains to be seen. Angelo appeared at my elbow. Miss Hathaway, the staff is assembled. Thank you. I addressed the table one final time. The invitation to join our closing meeting stands. But know this. In that kitchen, everyone is equal. No foster name, no social hierarchy. Just people who work hard and respect each other. We'd be honored, Carson said, standing. If you'll have us. I studied their faces, some tearful, some determined, all finally seeing me clearly. Then let's go. But remember, you're entering my world now. The rules are different here. As I led them toward the kitchen, I could hear the cheerful voices of my staff, my chosen family, preparing for our nightly ritual. These were people who had celebrated my successes, supported my dreams, and valued me for exactly who I was. Now, the Fosters would learn what real family looked like. I pushed open the kitchen doors, breathing in the familiar sense of herbs and fresh bread. Everyone, I announced to my staff, we have some guests joining us tonight. They're here to learn. Maria, my head chef, raised an eyebrow at the sight of the Fosters in their designer clothes. Learning to cook, boss? Learning to see, I corrected, then smiled. Let's show them how we do things in the Bellissimo family. The terms were set. Now came the real test, whether the Fosters could adapt to a world where worth wasn't inherited but earned, where respect wasn't demanded but given, freely, and where success was measured by how many people you lifted up along the way. As my staff welcomed the Fosters with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism, I stepped into my office for a moment alone. The weight of the evening's revelations, years, of carefully guarded secrets now laid bare, finally settled over me. I walked to my desk and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a small, worn photo. It showed my mother and me outside our tiny apartment in Minneapolis, the day I told her I'd been accepted to culinary school. Her face radiated pride despite the exhaustion in her eyes. We did it, Mom, I whispered to the photo. Just not the way either of us imagined. Through the office window, I could see into the kitchen where Carson was awkwardly attempting conversation with Maria. Claudette stood stiffly near the prep station, clearly out of her element, but trying. The sight stirred something unexpected. In me. Not satisfaction or vindication, but a kind of melancholic hope. For years, I'd imagined this moment would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like release. The anger that had fueled my determination, the hurt that had sharpened my ambition. They were dissolving, leaving space for something new, I thought about the woman I'd become. Not just successful, but hardened in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. Building walls while building an empire, protecting myself so thoroughly that I'd almost forgotten what vulnerability felt like. Angelo knocked softly. "Ms. Hathaway, a moment?" "Come." "In." He entered, closing the door behind him. "I've never seen you like this. So exposed." "Is that weakness?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. "No. It's strength of a different kind. The strength to stop hiding." I smiled, remembering the day I'd hired him. You know what's strange? I built all this partly to prove them wrong, but somewhere along the way, it became about proving myself right, about honoring my mother's sacrifices, your trust, everyone, who believed in me when they didn't. And now? Now I realize I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. Not to them, not even to myself. I returned the photo to its drawer. The question is, who am I without that driving need? Angelo considered this. Perhaps someone who can finally build for joy instead of justification? The wisdom of it struck me. When did you become a philosopher? When you gave a former street kid a chance to become a maitre d'. We all grew in your shadow, Ms. Hathaway. Maybe it's time you grew in your own light. I stood, smoothing my jacket. You're right, and it starts with being Jennifer, not the wronged daughter-in-law, not the secret millionaire, just me. Through the window, I saw Elena demonstrating proper knife technique to an entranced Eloise. Marco was explaining flavor profiles to Adam, who took notes with genuine interest. The barriers were falling, not through force, but through shared experience. "More thing," Angelo said as I moved toward the door. "Your mother called earlier. She saw something online about tonight's dinner. She said to tell you she's proud, but she's always been proud. Success just made it easier for others to see what she always knew." Tears pricked my eyes. The first, real tears of the evening. "Thank you." "Ready to go back out there?" I nodded. Ready to start fresh. No more hiding, no more proving. Just being. As I returned to the kitchen, I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of secret success, of justified anger, of righteous indignation, I could let it all go now. What remained was something purer. The simple desire to create, to nourish, to bring people together around good food and honest conversation. Carson looked up as I entered, and for the first time in years, I saw him clearly too. Not as the man who'd failed to defend me, but as someone who might also be ready to become better. "Jennifer?" he said, hope in his voice. "Carson," I replied, allowing possibility to creep into mine. The internal war was over. Peace, I realized, might actually be possible. Not through victory or vindication, but through the simple act of laying down arms I no longer needed to carry. Everyone gathered around the large prep table as Maria brought out fresh bread and Elena poured wine into mismatched glasses, the same ritual we'd performed hundreds of times, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like a beginning. "Before we start," I announced, raising my glass, "I want to thank everyone, my staff for your unwavering support and my family for finally seeing me, to new beginnings and authentic connections." As glasses clinked and conversation flowed, I felt the last pieces of my defensive armor fall away. I was no longer the Jennifer who had to prove her worth or hide her success. I was simply Jennifer, restaurant owner, employer, wife, daughter-in-law, and finally, myself. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer threatening. Whatever came next, I would face it as my complete self, no longer fractured between public humility and private triumph. The integration of all my parts, the ambitious entrepreneur, the wounded wife, the determined daughter, the visionary leader, felt like coming home. I caught my reflection in the steel prep table and smiled at the woman looking back. She was scarred but not broken, successful but not hardened, powerful but not cruel. She was, I realized with quiet satisfaction, exactly who my mother had raised me to be. The morning light streamed through Bellissimo's windows as I arrived earlier than usual, finding Claudette already waiting at the entrance. She looked different, her usual designer suit replaced with a simple dress, her face bare of its typical heavy makeup. "I hope you don't mind," she said quietly. I thought we could talk. Really talk." I unlocked the door, gesturing for her to enter. "Coffee?" "Please." As I prepared our drinks in the kitchen where just 12 hours ago our family had finally broken bread honestly, Claudette walked slowly around the dining room, really seeing it for the first time. "Every detail here tells a story, doesn't it?" she observed, running her fingers along the reclaimed wood table. "This isn't just a restaurant. It's your life's work on display." "Yes." I handed her a coffee. No fancy latte art, just good, strong coffee like my mother used to make. "Everything here has meaning." She took a sip, then looked at me directly. "I spent the whole night thinking. I realized something. When I first met Carson's father, I was like you, ambitious, full of dreams. But his family? They had their ideas about what a foster wife should be, and I let them change me. Maybe that's why you tried to change me," I offered. She nodded, tears threatening. "I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. Instead, I was perpetuating the very thing that had hurt me." She reached across the table, tentatively touching my hand. "Can we start over? Not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but as two women who understand what it costs to dream?" I squeezed her hand gently. "I'd like that." Over the next hours, we talked, really talked for the first time. About dreams deferred and dreams realized, about the weight of family expectations, about the price of success on your own terms. When Carson arrived for lunch service, he found us in the kitchen, Claudette wearing an apron as I taught her to make my signature tiramisu, the one inspired by my grandmother's recipe. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, genuine wonder in his voice. "No," I said, smiling at my mother-in-law as she concentrated on whipping the mascarpone. "Just making new memories, to replace the old ones." That evening, Claudette sent out her first social media post in years, a photo of herself in an apron at Bellissimo, covered in cocoa dust, with the caption, "Learning to see what's been in front of me all along. Proud to call a Jennifer Hathaway." Family. Real family. Within minutes, the post had hundreds of likes. The old guard of society was watching, recalibrating, understanding that the rules had changed. I looked around my restaurant, at the photos of my mother on the wall, at my staff preparing for dinner service, at my husband and his mother finally seeing me. All of me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's the simple act of becoming so completely yourself that others have no choice but to see you clearly. And sometimes, if you're lucky, that clarity allows everyone to finally become who they were meant to be all along. The sun set over Bellissimo as the first dinner guests arrived, painting everything in golden light. A new chapter was beginning, not just for me, but for all of us. And this time we were writing it together. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.